Right, we're going to move on now, ladies and gentlemen, from commercial vehicles back to cars, and we're going to talk about the retail and maintenance sectors. And the panel that are going to be joining me up here on stage are going to bring together many of the themes that we have touched on already today, of course, the economy, the move to zero emission vehicles, workforce, skilling, digital transformation, all this good stuff. But we're going to be looking at it very much through the lens of sales and aftercare. So please welcome our panel to the stage. They are Andy Randall from Halfords, Catherine Faiers from AutoTrader, and Rawdon from Jaguar Land Rover. And they'll come to the stage whilst we watch their opening video. Thank you.
The way consumers want to buy cars has changed for good as a result of the pandemic. They expect a seamless, connected experience where retailers are bringing the best of their digital and their physical forecourt experience to the fore.
As, if you like, traditional OEMs, we really need to respond to that to make sure that we are at the cutting edge of customer experience.
The UK automotive aftermarket is absolutely vital for the UK economy. To operate effectively in the aftermarket, there are two vital elements: people and parts.
Perfect timing as we sat down just as the lights came up. Thank you very much for joining us today, all of you, and thank you for those opening comments as well. Now we have, as I mentioned, we've already touched on the fact things have changed. We heard from Lotus earlier saying how they were going for a kind of buy your car online, come and collect it from the factory yourself. This was something that they were looking into. Things have definitely changing. Can I just ask each of you, I guess, what the emerging trends in your particular parts of the industry are? I mean, Andy, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I think in terms of the aftermarket, a couple of key things that we're facing into. I think first one is people. We've heard a bit today from others as well. So I think there's something around the ability to get people and to bring them into the industry. So we had kind of, coming out of COVID, there was a new threat because existing technicians were leaving the industry and doing things like truck driving and things as well. So we've got to bring the right people in, and the future is about electronic engineering. It's not about hitting things with a hammer. So there's a kind of cultural thing around people. Brexit as well, to an extent, held up some of the. We had previously an influx of Eastern European colleagues coming in. So I think that's the first one, people. I think the second one really for us is around supply chain. So we've got kind of all sorts of global economy issues. We've got we saw freight issues coming out of the Far East. A lot of the products that fitted to the vehicles come out of the Far East, or indeed Eastern Europe. So things like tyres are affected by that, all car parts are affected by that. So I think we've seen a lot of inflation in that area. Therefore, that is inevitably going to come through into the aftermarket over the next few years. So I think pricing will have to increase really just to sort of take care of some of that. So I think those are two issues, and then perhaps a bit later we'll talk about some of the things that people can do to offset some of that.
Absolutely. Well, Rawdon, at Jaguar Land Rover, how's the customer experience changing?
Yeah, I think the pandemic particularly accelerated a lot of things that we were seeing generically in the industry. So the increasing importance of digital, I think it just turbocharged it, if I can use that expression, at a predominantly EV-based conference, has basically just taken that and accelerated it to different levels. So the period of time that customers are using to actually buy a car is condensing. So I think it's 50% of our customers now start their journey and finish their journey within a month. So it's really condensed. They're doing more and more of their research online. 85% of customers' discovery is online. And in terms of then the physical side is still important, but the proliferation of that is reduced. So 50% of customers only visit retailers once for a purchase decision. So actually that visit becomes even more important, because get it right, you're almost guaranteed a sale. Get it wrong, you're almost guaranteed not a sale. So those trends, as I say, all OEMs were seeing that, but it just seemed to accelerate along that journey for our customers in that period.
From AutoTrader's point of view, does that ring true?
Absolutely. Certainly we've seen this acceleration of trends that were emerging prior to the pandemic. The big three for us have been digital retailing, as Rawdon touched on. Really, for us, digital retailing is about creating a connected, integrated consumer experience. It isn't about an online transaction. It's about bringing the best of an online digital experience, but also connecting that with the physical and connected forecourt experience that consumers are still looking for test drives, to inspect the vehicle, to experience the brand. We've also seen from a consumer perspective, the emergence of online-only retailers, they've really shifted the mindset of all retailers, I think, by putting the consumer and that consumer-centric approach right at the heart of how they run their business. So the fact that Kazoo and others came out early with customer satisfaction, with NPS scores, and said these are the ways, the metrics by which we want to be measured and judged. Are we transforming and delivering a better consumer experience? And that's raised the bar for all retailers, and that has driven, I think, everyone in the industry to sit there and look at how we are managing and evolving that consumer experience. The third big one, which I think is probably where revolution will happen rather than evolution, arguably, improving the consumer experience. Digital retailing is a journey that we're already on. For electric vehicles, the whole automotive ecosystem has to respond, has to evolve, has to look fundamentally different. The good news is we're seeing really, really high demand from consumers for electric vehicles. The challenge is consumers are confused, are finding it very, very difficult to navigate that journey. But we predict, and I think most people are predicting, about a third of the UK car park will be electric by 2030. So all of us and the whole ecosystem has to respond to meet that challenge.
In Rawdon, how are you finding that trend into electrification is affecting your customers? I mean, are you getting a lot of confused, head-scratching customers?
Well, there's an awful lot of desire. So having just launched 2 new cars in the last sort of 6 months or so, the desire for when is the full electric version coming. So we've launched both the Range Rover and Range Rover Sport with the plug-in hybrid. But yeah, the demand is definitely there. Jaguar will go all electric from 2025, so we will have no combustion engines on that brand, so we're fully committed there, and there'll be 6 new full electric Land Rovers by 2026. So for us, we definitely see the pull from customers in terms of the demand, which we're responding to. But in terms of, the head scratching, it's more complex. Does having an EV suit the customer's duty cycle? Is there sufficient infrastructure where they're not necessarily where they're living, but where they're using and driving the car? Do they understand the implications of residual values of electric cars? So it's not a different journey, but there are far more questions that the customer has to navigate. And there are some useful tools and tips that we've used. So we have something called an iPace app, which a prospective customer downloads onto their phone, and effectively it tracks their usage over a period of however long they want to do it for. And what that will tell them is, well, how much money will they save in fuel relative to because of electricity versus fuel. It'll talk to them about actually what infrastructure exists where they're driving. And again, we'll just give them a really good sort of handle before buying. So there are things like that we can do. But the key one, I think, for us that certainly we're investing a huge amount of time is just making sure that the people they're interacting with are more knowledgeable.
I was going to say, training the sales force.
That's the key thing. I mean, EV customers, they're even at the moment, they're still early adopters, so they're very well educated, they're well read. They don't want to come into a retail environment and find somebody that doesn't know as much as they do. So making sure that the interface that we have in the retail environment is of the right quality, and then making sure that there's sufficient. You talked about, the previous presentation about the difficulties in repairing EVs. You have to be trained because it's potentially lethal. So making sure there is the sufficient capability to repair the vehicles in our workshops. Those 2 parallel trains are things that we're investing in significantly.
So, Andy, when it comes to knowledge and the skills for your teams who are dealing with people coming, say, wanting aftercare and extra add-ons and so on, how are you coping with that?
It's a major shift. So I think 2 areas. First of all, there is the need to upskill people. So, there will have to be a shakeout in the aftermarket because you have to invest a lot of money in people. And we're investing, bringing in, apprentices, we're bringing in technical learners, we're doing more and more EV training for people. And you've got to get ahead of the curve. And really only largish organisations, I think, will be able to sort of make those investments without external support from government or whatever. So we're making those investments ourselves, focusing on people for the future, training them now, making sure that we're buying the equipment that you need to service these vehicles as well. So that's one thing. I think the other thing that's really important is the use of technology in the aftermarket. So we've a few years ago, we started developing digital infrastructure. So, and you'll see this, I'm sure, across the aftermarket. So the three areas you really need to get control of are the consistency of the customer operation. So a digital ecosystem that tracks the customer. We can see when the customer needs things doing. We explain to the customer the work that we're doing and all that sort of thing. That's the first bit. The second bit is actually tracking the supply chain. I mentioned before the issues in the supply chain. So really, as a business now, we're digitally linked into all our suppliers. We've got just-in-time deliveries, 30 minutes for any part into any of our 800 garages around the country, for example. All that digital infrastructure we've put in over the last few years, and that will be even more important as we move into the electric and hybrid vehicles as well. And then the third and final area is the control of what goes on in the workshop in two ways. One, to give technicians support so that they can see exactly what they do in the workshop. And then the other thing is, because the automotive aftermarket has had a bit of a reputation in the past of not being necessarily trustworthy. So what we are doing now, and other companies are doing this as well, but we're leading the way with technology that photographs all the work that's undertaken, makes sure that we give digital imprints for everything that's being done, gives the customer, PDFs and pictures of all the work that's undertaken. So I think using digital infrastructure to give confidence and to give support to colleagues so they can do things in the right way, then that actually will quite dramatically change the face of the aftermarket, and the digital cars, if you like, are sort of leading that way.
I mean, Catherine, with all the sort of the wealth of knowledge that you can gather at AutoTrader, I mean, what are some of the themes and trends which are emerging in terms of who's buying electric vehicles, which brands they're buying? Has it affected buyers' brand loyalty? I mean, can you give us a bit of a sort of a download on that?
Sure. I mean, the interesting thing about prospective EV buyers that we're seeing when they come to market is there isn't really a segment of buyers that are only EV buyers. So consumers are coming to market, and they're typically, most consumers are still looking at a basket of electric vehicles, but equally comparing those vehicles with ICE vehicles. They're also looking across new and used models. And when we look at our demographic data, slightly depressingly at the moment, but I think a reflection of the choice that's out there and available, we're seeing most people that end up with an EV purchase are typically from higher income groups, and they're also typically slightly older age demographics. Perhaps not what you would associate always with like the generation that's most likely to be the early adopters, but the income overlay here is hugely important just because of the choice and availability of make models out there currently in the market. When it comes to brand loyalty and brand consideration, that's perhaps where we've seen some of the biggest shifts. We always track and have done for a number of years, a kind of top 10 performing vehicles on AutoTrader. And historically, these have been a very, very static cohort and mix of vehicles. So it would be all the makes and models that we know and love, like the VW Golf or the 3 Series or the Corsa. And when we now look at that data, we're seeing encouragingly lots of EVs appearing in that top 10. But the life cycle and the volatility we're seeing is huge. So a new EV will come to market, and it might stay in that number 1 or number 2 position for 3 months, for 6 months, maximum perhaps 12 months, and then it drops out very rapidly as we see, the next new launch gain momentum and really gain traction in the market. When we look at the demographic data again, we're then seeing big shifts in consumer consideration sets. So the type of consumer that we would typically expect perhaps to go down the route of ending up in a German premium brand, we're seeing them actually very, very open about exploring other brands that we perhaps wouldn't have had in that consideration set. So Kia, Hyundai, brands that have come out with brilliant new electric vehicles from the consumer, where that consideration set has changed, and they're looking at performance, they're looking at battery life, and they're looking at, the overall appearance of the vehicle. Actually, those cars benchmark well, and consumers are prepared to shift that brand loyalty that might have actually been embedded for some time and have been passed down the generations based on what family members or other friends had experienced in terms of owning that vehicle.
With the technology moving so fast, what's happening to the second-hand electric vehicle market?
So we're seeing early and encouraging signs. I think we're certainly firm believers, and I think the industry is too, that we need a liquid, healthy, robust used car market to really drive momentum in the new car market. We need stable pricing, good pricing visibility, and liquidity from consumers. Early signs are good, but we are still seeing a lot more nervousness from consumers around battery life, around performance. And the benchmarking data is not there for consumers yet at scale for them to be able to get that confidence that they need over that EV being a viable vehicle choice for them for another 3-5 years, or however long they're thinking about that ownership cycle. So more work still to do in the used EV market to get us there.
What's your customer feedback been like, Rawdon, on the EV models? I mean, I'm suspecting you might say it's been excellent.
Well, I think it's a very broad question. Well, there's huge interest. So earlier on in one of the early presentations, we referred to Goodwood Festival of Speed this weekend, 200,000 people, which is a clear demonstration that people want physical. They don't want to do the whole thing on their sofas and their smartphones. They want to talk to people. We have our stand there, and the stand that had the most test drive requests, the most inquiry levels was iPace. That car is 5 years old. So, in terms of the traditional life you would expect of a vehicle, it probably peaks in year 2 where you've got all of your previously engine derivatives and everything else, and then basically it tails off. EV vehicles have a very, very different very different life as infrastructure goes in. I'm sure we'll talk about infrastructure shortly, and obviously just it becomes a more mainstream purchase, which it's clearly becoming. And I think we've seen it in New Car Buyer Survey. That's one of the Bibles for the OEMs. It's basically for the first time, we've seen appeal for battery electric vehicles overtake plug-in hybrids. So that again is another indication that people are ready to make the move to full EV rather than either hybrid or stay with ICE vehicles.
I mean, giving us a sort of, a finger in the wind, Andy. I mean, the customers who are coming in for aftercare and after sales with you at Halfords, are they generally, do you feel that they're a satisfied bunch of customers, that they're enjoying the EV experience?
Well, it's all about charging infrastructure. I think that's
we did have to get to that, didn't we?
Yeah, right. So,
We do.
so we've started rolling out. We've got some electric vehicles now that we give people, as courtesy cars whilst their cars are being repaired, for example. And we get the feedback around. Well, I'm a bit nervous because and they've got a couple of 100 miles. So I think infrastructure is the main feedback we get. But I think the thing that is surprising people is how quickly actually certain parts of the aftermarket are preparing themselves to be able to service, maintain and repair the vehicles. I think that's quite encouraging. You get things like, we've had a few customers surprised that their tyres have worn out maybe a bit quicker than they expected. There's a bit of extra weight in certain electric vehicles, and therefore they don't necessarily get the tyre life and things like that. But I think that's the sort of feedback that we've been having.
In terms of customer adoption, I think as soon as somebody moves to EV, it's very rare for them to move back.
Yeah.
That's one of the other, I guess, more broader trends in terms of EV adoption. Once they're used to the quietness, the speed, I guess the convenience, if it suits their duty cycle in terms of how they're driving, then actually going back is very rare.
It was only a matter of 4 months ago that we were at a similar sort of conference talking about electric vehicles, and infrastructure was the subject. It was, government had been announcing they were going to be putting money into it and so on, and there was lots of discussion as to what methods and where and what kind of service it should be. I mean, Catherine, where are we now in July? I mean, are things looking up? Because sort of anecdotally, it doesn't sound great.
So I think we're seeing good momentum. We're seeing things move in the right direction. It is undoubtedly behind affordability. It's the biggest barrier for consumers. I think we've been trying very consciously to change the conversation away from range anxiety towards charge confidence. And actually, when you look at, because I think the media always has a role to play in these things, and actually for most consumers, well, we know the percentage of consumers that have access to a driveway where they can charge their car. We know the work going into infrastructure, to service stations. Some of the estimates of the infrastructure are huge. And actually, as we are seeing these rapidly reducing technology cycles and range expanding at kind of very big incremental rates, then I don't know, I feel like we will get there, and we need to help consumers on that journey and help them to have the confidence that the infrastructure will follow. And we're seeing the right signs of that. Clearly, the government can always do more, but I think we all as an industry have a very important role to play in that journey as well.
Let's move on to something a bit different. Andy, MOT legislation, it's reviewing it. What would be the implications of that?
Yeah, so, I mean, frankly, a bit of a surprise to me that sort of seemed to come out of concerns over cost of living and everything. So, In my time in the industry, it's like the third or fourth time that we've kind of been through this cycle. The story is that they like to extend the amount of time before a car has to have an MOT. So all the previous pieces of work that have been done on this, mass consultations, have all come to the point that actually safety is at the core of everything. So still now, around a third of vehicles that are presented for MOT fail, and they fail on safety-related items. It's tyres, it's brakes, it's lighting, it's visibility. Those are the failure rates. So that, I don't think it makes sense from that point of view. I think also nowadays you can get an MOT for less than £40. Customers are paying £30 on average for MOT. I think the average in the market is less than £40. So £40 for an annual safety check. And there's more evidence emerging now that actually if you don't get things changed at that point, it actually costs you more than maybe the second year and so on. It was interesting in 2020, I saw some stats on how we'd had the cessations and everything because of COVID during 2020. And what seemed to happen there was the MOT failures actually went up, despite the fact that the vehicles hadn't done as much miles and so on. The MOT failure rate went up. And in Northern Ireland, there was a study there where Northern Ireland had a 1-year extension, and there was a 10-point difference in failure rate. So that all suggests to me, and by the way, in 2020, 8 million tyres were identified as what they call advisories. That's to say that they wouldn't really get to another MOT. So 8 million tyres were wrong. Now, they wouldn't be picked up with the suggestion. So, I completely understand that the cost of living crisis is difficult for everyone. I think there are ways in which we should all be thinking about how we can kind of offset cost of energy and all those things for people. But I just think this is a red herring. This is definitely the wrong thing that people are promoting here. And frankly, I would see it being dangerous. It's a safety issue and could ultimately be more expensive. So, I think it's crazy.
I think that's pretty clear cut. Thank you very much. Rawdon, we're talking about the cost of living crisis in that discussion. How's it impacting your kind of views of the business?
Well, it's definitely impacting our retail business. We touched on it before in terms of our ability to access the labour market. I think it's definitely a seller's market, whatever you're selling, whether it's a house, whether it's a car, whether it's your labour. And we're seeing that definitely have an impact on retail, the wages we're paying in retail. I think retail has probably at one point had 180,000 vacancies in automotive retail. Just gives you an indication of the scale of that. So in terms of whether it's not directly attributed to necessarily to just to the cost of living, but I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges we've got is how we make the industry more attractive for people to go into retail. So if I think about my business, actually it's relatively straightforward to attract people to the brand, to attract people into the environment as a service advisor, as a technician, as a sales executive. That's more challenging. There aren't lots of people queuing up. Now, we've done a lot of work engaging with people just out of school to try and find what it is that they want. Perhaps not surprisingly, they're interested in sustainability, they're interested in flexibility of work, and another one of the themes we had from this morning's panels, and they're interested in career paths. So that's probably that's definitely where we'll be putting our energy with our retail partners to make sure that we're attracting the right people, and not going through the cycle of probably, I think what we do today is we want to recruit for experience. Well, actually, in today's labour market, that doesn't work. You have to recruit for aptitude, and then we have to train those skills in. This idea about I want to have somebody who's going to be productive immediately is just a complete misnomer. So as an industry, that's definitely in the retail space something we need to invest more time in. And the apprentice scheme, that was touched on a lot this morning as well, that's key to it, because if we can grow our own, that always helps, but we just haven't got time.
Yeah. How are you finding, from AutoTrader's point of view, this obviously pressure because of the cost of living crisis, as outlined by Rawdon, and yet the demand still seems to be there, doesn't it? It's a seller's market.
Demand's still very strong. I mean, there's still 2 million new and used car transactions that didn't happen during the pandemic that we would otherwise have expected to happen. So consumers, typically the life cycle or the hold period for a consumer is very consistent, and actually has been very consistent through history. It doesn't move that much with economic cycles. When you ask consumers what purchases they'll prioritise in this type of environment, buying a car is very near the top of the list of things that they want to and will continue to do. So with those lost transactions, still some pent-up demand there, and with those structural drivers around car buying, I think there's lots of reasons to believe consumer demand will remain very robust. We have seen it soften from the very high levels that we saw on our platforms as we were coming out of lockdown periods, and there was very, very strong pent-up demand. But we're still at over 50 million visits a month. We're still well ahead of the levels we were trading at in 2019. So overall consumer demand and engagement is still very much there. I think many more of the challenges are on the supply side and how that will play out in the coming months.
So you're not seeing a shift there for people looking for more of a bargain?
No, we've spent a lot of time looking at trying to observe the different consumer behaviours and the different search behaviour. The cost of a used car has gone up by about 30% in the last 18 to 24 months or so. Seen the average price on AutoTrader go from £13,000 to about £18,000. But about 70% of consumers come to market with a car to sell, as well as being in market to look for a car to buy. So actually, for the majority of consumers, they are insulated from some of those pricing dynamics. We have seen more consumers looking to finance, so looking to finance the car through different channels. With employment rates still remaining very high, I think actually finance as a route to help affordability for most consumers at the moment feels like a good one, because they feel like they've got that stability of income and are there and ready to support a finance deal to enable them to make that next car transaction.
Now, Rawdon, you touched on the need for, what you're going to do to attract the skills that you need in the business. And Andy, I know that that's obviously an issue very much at Halfords as well. Could you outline any of the things that you're doing in order to do that, in order to attract new talent in?
Yeah. So first of all, we're going into schools and colleges. And someone touched on this earlier, and I thought it was a great point. You've got to sell a bit of a dream for what this industry is going to be. And, I think we're all of us working it probably quite excited, and we can see these digital changes and how things are changing for the better. But I think we need to really get people young and really start to work with them and show them the opportunities. So that's a massive thing for us. I think that the other thing is, one of the dangers is the more you upskill people, the more other people, nick them from you. You become the kind of trainer for the industry. And you've just got to be bold, really, on that one. And we've thought hard about that, but we've just taken the view we are going to train everybody, and if we are out there as the preeminent trainers in the industry, then, if people want to take them off, it's fair enough, but ultimately we think we can attract enough because they'll know that we're the best for that. So I think those are two very important things. Get them really as early as possible and keep upping the skills of everybody you've got. I think those are the top two things for me.
Yeah.
I think from my side, it's probably, I'll exaggerate for effect, there would have been a time with our retail network where we would have said, this is how many techs you need, this is how many sales executives you need, service advisors you need, make sure you're fully capacitized. I think those days are gone. I think our role has to be much more proactive. I think it's about selling the dream for me, about actually what a career in Jaguar Land Rover could offer, selling the fact that we're investing £2.5 billion every year in new products, leading in terms of technology, in terms of the environments they would work in, the vision the brand has for a sustainable future, zero emissions by 2039, net zero by 2039. So those are the things we think will tap into the future workforce. And then finding a way to integrate those people into our retail network. But almost treating them as two separate points is just not going to work.
Now, any questions from you guys? Questions from the audience? Let's see if I can see any hands in the gloom. Anybody out there? Yes, this gentleman here, if you sort of wait for the microphone and say who you are, that would be great.
Hello, Peter Murphy from Ultima Media. This is a question for Catherine from AutoTrader. I wondered if around 2030, when the last petrol and diesel cars will be sold in the UK, do you think that's going to affect used car buyer behaviour? What will be going through their minds? Will they want the last petrol car, or will they think, I don't want to buy this because who's going to buy it off me in 2035? I wonder if it's maybe not too early to make any predictions there.
It's good to predict the future because no one has
I'm
the
glad
answer
you've got
right.
that question.
Yeah. So what are we seeing? So today, we're already seeing demand for EVs track well ahead of supply. So actually, the early adopters, I think we're now on the brink. I think Rawdon mentioned it earlier, but I think we're on the edges of mass market when it comes to electric vehicles. So I don't actually worry at all that the demand momentum is there. We've got a lot of work to do to catch up the choice and supply side, particularly in lower value vehicles, we see about 25% of the market still in sub 20,000 cars, and there's 3 EVs. None of them are really viable family or mass market cars for consumers. It's really interesting when you project forward to 2030 because 2/3 of the car park is still going to be ICE vehicles, and there's going to be a very, very long tail of used car transactions for many, many years. And we've already seen, even with depressed new car volumes over the last few years, we're seeing the average life of vehicle extend, and we're seeing fewer and fewer cars being scrapped at the other end. So actually the UK car park has still been growing until last year, despite the very depressed new car transaction volumes. So I think we're trying to project forward what's going to happen to EV pricing, which we have a lot of confidence over actually, and good visibility on where we think residual values will trend. It's actually interestingly harder, I think, to predict what will happen to the price of ICE vehicles, because on one level they could actually become quite attractive, quite affordable, because the average age of the vehicle will be a bit older. Depending on what happens to fuel prices, there'll still be a very viable purchase for many, many consumers. So I think probably 2 schools of thought at the moment. One, that the market for ICE vehicles is going to collapse, that pricing will collapse. But as ever in this industry, supply and demand levels out, pricing is the kind of equaliser, and it will normalise. Or you've got kind of the counter view that actually it's going to be very robust. There's going to be a big segment of consumers that are still going to very much look to ICE to perform a useful and very functional role for them in their next vehicle purchase.
Thank you for that. Time for another one. Any more? Yes, hand waving at us over there. Thank you.
Hi, David Betterley. So aren't some of those assumptions based on the current regulation and taxation? So the government's going to do something about electric cars. They're going to put VAT on electricity when you charge it at home. They're going to do something about fuel duty, and they're going to stick it on electric cars somehow, possibly via road pricing. Doesn't that change the argument?
If only we knew what the government were going to do on anything, really. Yes, we're projecting based on the data we have today, and we're very happy. We share that data a lot. We're very happy to share it with anyone who's interested in digging into it more. We can absolutely layering assumptions about what happens to fuel prices, what happens to the taxation regime, and look at how that will trend. Ultimately, what we see in the car market is driven by consumer demand and consumer behaviour. And if we continue to see the momentum we're seeing towards electric vehicles and the consumer demand that we are experiencing at the moment, then I'd probably at the moment be more in the school of thought that the demand and the market for ICE vehicles will correct and will adjust and will find its new normal, which over time will be a way away from where it is today. But yeah, the government clearly could play a very important role and influence how that plays out quite significantly.
I love the fact that the theme of today's conference has been, could they just have a strategy about anything, please? But listen, my thanks to you all, to Catherine, to Rawdon and Andy. Ladies and gentlemen, please, a round of applause for our panel. Thank you.